Okay, so to review, essentially, we started out with defining what a species was. A species is organisms that are capable of interbreeding and they produce fertile offspring. So if we have organisms that are capable of interbreeding, but their offsprings are not fertile, or they're not able to produce fertile offspring, then we have what are called hybrids. So for example, things like ligers or zybroids, where they are not able to reproduce with members of their same species. We then talked about how evolution occurs. So remember, evolution is a change in a gene pool over time, and we had 5 fingers to remember this. We had our pinky, okay, which was a small population size or a shrinking population. Okay, we had our ring finger, which was for non-random mating. We had our middle finger, which was for mutations. We had our pointer finger, which was for gene flow into and out of an area, so immigration and emigration. And then we had our thumb, which was for voting thumbs up for a particular trait, so natural selection. We talked about types of reproduction. So in sexual reproduction, we have more variations within a species versus asexual reproduction, where you're essentially making clones of yourself. These variations come from different types of mutations, and mutations is simply just a copying error in a DNA sequencing. They can be helpful, harmful, or have no effect at all, and usually evolution is a very small or a very slow process, because we have to get so many of these mutations in order to become, or in order to have a lot of variations and become a new species. There are 2 different types of isolation that helps to speed up this speciation process. There can be geographic isolation, where I take one species or one population of a particular species and divide it and separate it from another, where these 2 then are going to kind of like evolve with their own set of characteristics until they're not capable of interbreeding. Or there is reproductive isolation, where we talk about things like mating calls or like different plumage and this sort of thing, which would, even though these 2 types of species could mate, these 2 species could mate, they don't, because they would never mate with each other on their own, and the reason for that is this different mating call or the different plumage, those sorts of things. We have what's called adaptive radiation. So that is where I have one species that radiates out to many species, and the reason for that is because they adapt to particular parts of their environment. Great example of these is the Galapagos finches that formed into a whole bunch of different species based on the type of food that was available for them. There's 2 different theories about how species occur. The first one is punctuated equilibrium, which means that we stay pretty much the same for long periods of time, and then we have rapid change quite quickly to form new species. And this kind of ends up looking kind of like a really sharp square tree. In comparison, though, to gradualism, which is small changes over time until eventually we have a species, and there we have more Y-ing of a tree when we look at different lineages. We have lots of evidence for evolution. So we have, for example, the peppered moth that evolved where they had differences in gene pool just based on their environment. Before the Industrial Revolution, the white moths were favored. After the Industrial Revolution, the black moths were favored. We have things like selective breeding. So this is where humans are choosing the traits that we want to have for a particular species. And this gives rise to genetically modified organisms through the process of selective breeding. We have embryo similarity, so where all vertebrates kind of look the same as they're an embryo until they eventually become like a fetus. We have homologous structures, which is where we have similar structures that serve a variety of functions, and this is through divergent evolution in comparison to analogous structures, which are different forms that have the same function, and this comes together through convergent evolution. We have examples like vestigial organs, where not only humans but other organisms have these organs that their ancestors had, but are no longer functioning or serve no purpose in that particular organism or species. We see that we're related chemically through our DNA to different organisms, and we share either large or small portions of our DNA with them, and that is all evolution or evidence for evolution. Thank you, and we'll see you next lesson.